It is on air. Click. Do you know
No,
what
I'm not making that mistake.
No, do you know what I think we could actually do? I meant to mention this to you, so I'm going to do it on air instead. I think as part of our intro, we actually record
Have some SCBA sounds.
SCBA click, and then when the episode is over,
like coming back off air.
Yeah.
We could probably record some SCBA sounds. I bet they're already on the internet. We'll find them.
We'll find them on the internet, or I can do it tomorrow when I go teach.
That's true.
Yeah.
Do we know any firefighters in the world?
Do we know any firefighters who happen to
have an air pack?
Have an air pack nearby? Anywho, well, welcome to On Air. I know. Click.
You're doing
How
it
about
now.
Click. That's
and
on
then
air.
It's Darth Vader.
Oh yeah, we get Darth Vader. Welcome to On Air.
James
I am your CEO.
Yeah, I bet we could create James Earl Jones
doing our intro. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm Olivia.
I'm Eric.
As I mentioned, I'm Darth Vader. This is my business partner, Luke Skywalker.
I guess. So I'm like your son?
No, actually.
Wait, sorry, spoiler alert.
Oh, if you've not seen Star Wars.
Ugh.
Oh gosh, we just ruined a whole generation. Anyway.
The world's coming to an end.
Speaking of, this is really great banter for the fact that it is nighttime. We're like, what's happening? We have to get some sleep. And it's a perfect banter for who we're speaking to today. Captain Kevin Housley.
The founder of Firefighter Craftsmanship.
He loves a good sleep mouth taping session. He loves breathwork. He loves putting projects on his plate. That's what I learned. That's what I learned from this.
This is the first time I met him.
Yeah.
He's recommended books that I've read that have changed how we are raising our daughter.
Yeah, he's been impactful on our life.
Yeah, the man has had an influence on our lives, and it's crazy that we're so close in circles and geography, and yet this was the first time I had the opportunity to talk to him.
Well, that's same with you, though. I mean, you have full-on relationships with people who are partners of YFFR that I have never spoken to.
It's just crazy how it works.
But in all honesty, I've learned way more than that about Kevin on this podcast. But the reason Kevin and I are besties is because we taught at the same conference and decided to co-teach because so much of what we teach is so similar that we're like, let's just do this together. And so we've been fans of each other ever since. That was a few years back. And he's what I call kind of what I call myself, a neuroscience enthusiast, right? You're not a neuroscientist, but you really dive deep into it. And he's just full of amazing knowledge. And if you're on his crew, if I were a firefighter, there's 4 people, including you, that if I were a firefighter, I'd want to be my company officer. And he's one of them,
It sounds like he's got a great crew and he's the captain on it. And so he leads from the front, but allows his guys to kind of help guide the ship a little bit. So I really liked his leadership style at work and on the job from what he's sharing in the episode too.
Yeah. So I think everyone's going to really enjoy this and get a lot out of it. And spoiler alert, or should I say a little preview or Easter egg, I should say, is that if you're going to leave this podcast episode with ways to quite literally and easily change your life that you can implement tonight. And your life will be changed. So definitely, and those aren't revealed till the end of the episode. So you're going to have to listen to the whole thing for those magic tools. So anyway, please enjoy Kevin Housley. Welcome to Yoga for First Responders On Air, where we break down yoga, neuroscience, resilience, and public safety in a manner that's authentic, educational, and most importantly, entertaining and lighthearted. I'm YFFR's founder, Olivia Mead. As a yoga instructor and neuroscience enthusiast, I'm passionate about supporting first responders and anyone looking to improve their overall human performance. Each week, we'll dive into a new topic and often bring on expert guests to share their insights and experiences. But we'll also keep it real and share our own stories and struggles along the way. So whether you're a first responder or seeking to master the science of mental and physical resilience, this podcast is your ultimate guide to triumph over life's challenges with unbreakable strength and unwavering fortitude. By pressing play, your training has begun. Thank you for doing an evening session with us.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad it finally worked out. It's taken like a year and a half to finally get together.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But we're getting it done. I published your blog today, and we're getting the podcast done. And we're talking about one of my favorite subjects. This is not the only thing we're going to talk about, but one of the things that's going to come up is one of my favorite activities. I get so excited for this activity, okay? And I get like so pumped for it. I even kind of do a dance when I'm getting myself ready. And it's one of the two things that you do in bed. And I really get excited for it. And that is,
as you should.
That's sleep. That is sleeping. I literally get like, I tell Eric, I'm like, I'm so excited to go to sleep.
Yeah, like she actually has a dance routine. Like her bedtime routine includes like dancing for sleep. Like no joke. Like it is.
So I'm like
she's so pumped up about sleeping. I'm actually excited to talk and bring sleep into the podcast as well. And so, because it's so critical, and having been off the truck for 6 years at this point, sleep cycles are still, I actually think I'm sleeping better, obviously now. But I'm finding the importance of it like so much. Like Olivia always said, like if I don't get 8-9 hours of sleep, I feel like garbage. I'm like, man, you don't need that much sleep. You can run on less than that. And I'm actually really actually arguing for longer sleep cycles and being in bed for a long time. And I feel better. Like if I'm to the point now, if I sleep less, I feel like garbage, and I'm starting to be aware of it, man. So I'm excited for like what you've got to bring and how you work through sleep with firefighters, because obviously it comes up in our classes with yoga, breathwork, mindfulness training. And we get to neuro reset at the end. We got guys falling asleep. It's not the point. That's not the goal of the neuro reset at the end. But they're so sleep deprived or sleep disrupted that if we can get them to a point where they're falling asleep snoring in a matter of 1 minute, it just shows how disrupted their sleep cycle is. And we've finally got them to a downregulated state where they can put themselves in that restful state. So like blow our minds, man. Like I'm excited. And I think our audience is going to really enjoy this as well.
Well, and before I kick it over to you, Kevin, I was going to say, this is my first intro to you. My first, our origin story is that I listened to you teach this class, and I was like, this bitch is stealing all my content. Not stealing it, but like, what am I now? He said everything that I was going to say. So what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, quickly, pivot. So how did you get so smart? Go.
Well, that was a fun class at Mile High a few years back. And what a cool way to meet you there, Olivia. I mean, obviously I'd heard a lot about you from Rick George and Dave Gillespie, some of the legends in the space. And yeah, that was really cool. And I definitely did not steal your content. I
didn't mean
threw
steal.
a little sprinkling out there. Yeah. And then you were like, no, I'm a fan of like Austin Kleon, his book, Steal Like an Artist, like take stuff and then, there's not a lot of original ideas, but just make them better or make them more applicable for your space or whatever. And that was fun. We kind of team taught together with you in the audience with us meeting, an hour before. And, we had some sprinkle, and then you actually put some like knowledge base behind it and made us look smart, I think, at that point. So with John and I teach today.
Well, what was cool about that is I think it's a really good pairing, and this is why Eric and I are good when we teach together, is when I find that sometimes those, especially if you're on the same department or crew, they don't want to learn from you. You don't know more than I do, it doesn't work that well. And so being an outsider coming in with knowledge, right? Then people are more apt to listen to me because I am coming from the outside. But then your side saying the same thing, those in the profession or having been in the profession, gives the buy-in, right? So I think it's this really good, co-teaching of saying the same thing from two different lenses that folks kind of run out of excuses to ignore what we're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, if we pay attention when we're in emergency services, if you pay attention in any career or just life, but especially emergency services, you start to do things and you start to develop processes and protocols, sometimes for survival, sometimes to be successful even when you're really, really tired, or sometimes to be successful when you don't necessarily know what to do. And I think that a lot of those things that I had, and then, going and getting some formal education, which we can talk about why I decided to go through that painful process, which is 5 weeks away from finally being complete.
Wow.
Thank goodness.
Well, you can't tease that and not say what you're going to complete. Like, I'm curious, what are you about to complete?
Well, I'm working on my master's degree from University of Denver. It's a master's in sport coaching with an emphasis on human performance psychology.
Damn.
And
sweet.
so that program has been pretty cool, where they've allowed me to really kind of like chase the rabbits that I want to learn about within this overarching sports psychology, sport coaching framework. And that they've allowed me to really chase like human performance psychology specific to emergency responders for the last 3 years. So I'm super close and very, very excited. We'll talk about, I'm working on the research project right now. Kind of the cool thing about that program is they don't have you do like a thesis per se, is they make you design, get approved, and then fully conduct, capture data, a research study, and then you have to write it up with the goal to try to get it published in a journal.
Sweet, man.
And so, so I'm kind of right in the middle of that. I'm capturing data right now with the fire department about the seen and unseen cultural implications of sleep for firefighters on a 4896 work schedule in a municipal fire department that's pretty busy.
Yeah.
It's not yours though.
I can't disclose right now which one it is, just since it's an active research process. Yeah.
Well, but my question about that is, because I was actually talking to one of my students at a Colorado Fire Department today or yesterday about actually sleep and stuff like that. And he was saying that their experience is it's so challenging to get a sleep study or to do any of that because of I don't know if liability is the right word, but then I guess the city doesn't want to approve it because of what it might reveal, right? So it's like they can't, the thing is, in fact, he was told, or someone he knows or something like that was told, it is cheaper for the city, to pay out your family upon your death than to take care of you for your career.
Isn't that the sad truth and reality, though? I mean, and I'm actually curious, Kevin. Then, I mean, you're keeping very stiff upper lip, and I appreciate that, and holding your tongue because of sleep. I'm sure you're familiar with James Gearing, Behind the Shield podcast. He's a very big proponent of a 24/72 cycle. And he's really been pushing that, a lot of it because it revolves around sleep, just working on getting longer rest regulation periods after a 24-hour shift before folks are coming right back into it. And so there's obviously much debate around what shift cycle is going to work best towards sleep regulation. I'm curious if you've got thoughts from your research on that. But I'm actually curious, you tease something out, and I'm curious to hear you say or explain why you decided to go for advanced education. Because people are aware of this, when I was on the truck, I did make the conscious choice. I was interested in psychology, becoming a clinician for this space, but actually made the conscious choice not to go that route, just because I was having some success through peer support, through more unofficial channels and that kind of stuff. So I made the conscious choice not to go the official education route. And now if I were to go back, I'd probably do something actually similar to what you did, or in something in like the neuroscience field. So I'm curious why because you kind of teased into that as to why you made that choice.
Yes. Yeah. I think I started teaching resiliency training just at my local fire department. Got a hour and a half initially in the fire academy in 2016. And that's grown into a full 2-day class that we get to teach every time we have a fire academy locally. And so from that, John McKeon and I, initially it was Doug McGraw, who is retired from the job, and then John McKeon kind of came in and took the tactical fitness side of stuff. And then I would teach the resiliency system, because that's really kind of what I'm really interested in. Mm-hmm. And that morphed into like this whole pre-resiliency training is what I like to call that. And that
I just saw that course I saw that course on your website, Resilience, and I thought that's a brilliant term. So I'm going to have to tease. You're going to have to talk about that too.
Yeah, for sure. And this really falls in line with what you guys do at Yoga for First Responders, right? I always get a good chuckle when Olivia's talking smack, like, hey, let's put peer support teams out of business. Let's put talk therapy out of business. And I mean, we all see the value in that stuff, right? But let's give people tools and develop resiliency and empower them to take their own journey and their own life and their own path before they need it, right? And so like in emergency services, not every day is a great day, but also not every day is a bad day. And so you have all these other stressors along the way, organizational stress, stress at home. I have a new child, right? For you guys, we have 3 kids, right. Ourselves. And so there's like lots of stress all the time. And then we impart stress upon ourselves through tactical fitness, yoga, things like that are actually a positive, but it's still stress. And then maybe you go to work and you have a really bad day, or you have a run of nasty calls. And now you have this big old pot of stress on top of all the other stress. And so how do we empower people to, the goal that we always talk about at Firefighter Craftsmanship is we want you to retire happy, healthy, and strong. Mm-hmm. Like for people to walk away from a career that should fill you up and be super burned out, be all pissed off, be divorced, maybe 2 or 3 times divorced. We have a huge mental health thing that's finally getting talked about, right? With the suicide side of things, or PTSD or PTS, or just hypervigilance. Like all of those things kind of really started to grow from this initial offering. And that offering kind of came from things just from my childhood growing up, where I was using some of these tools. I never got taught them. I just kind of figured them out in an act of, I wouldn't say survival because that's dramatic, but like just to be able to do the things that I wanted to do as a little kid. Sure. And I had, I struggled with a bunch of like social anxiety, and that social anxiety initially was tied to school. And so like, I remember the very first day of kindergarten and the way that I felt going, like all of us probably remember those first couple of days of elementary school, and you're like really, really nervous. Mm-hmm. For me, that never went away until I graduated college. Right. And so like, I was go ahead.
I just wanted to say, to comment on the social anxiety thing. Clearly you did get over that because your wife is smoking. So
yeah.
After when he met her. Continue.
Yeah. Every once in a while I'll tell a funny joke. I think that's what tricked her. Yeah.
Humor does win.
And so, yeah. So there was a lot of things that I was doing, like trying to control my mindset, or like working some breath control and stuff like that I just kind of learned as a kid. I got to play a lot of sports as a kid, loved playing sports, loved hanging out with friends, like all those sorts of things. But to try to play sports that every kid thinks they're a super high level athlete, I certainly was not. But to get to play, all the way up through high school sports and stuff like that, you learn some of these tools from coaches or just from yourself along the way to try to be successful, maybe in different environments, And so as we started to teach these classes in Fire Academy and then like Mile High Fire Con, MAFC, which you guys are getting ready to go to soon. Firefighter Craftsmanship made an appearance up at a firemanship conference in Portland. I had the flu, so John rolled solo up there for us. From those, when you start to teach people and you're giving them actionable tools that either we've given them a name to, like some breath protocol or mindset training, things like that, then you start to get requests of, well, not only can you come teach my fire department, or police department or whatever, absolutely, right? But hey, can you come teach my 10-year-old baseball team that I'm a coach of?
Right? Totally.
And that really was kind of that, that was that switch where I said, I need some formal education because I don't want to mess these kids up. I think I know what I'm talking about. But
it's okay to mess up the firefighters, but not the kids.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Those responders. We know the responders are already damaged, right? They're there's something wrong with them anyways. And so,
right.
So that it could only get better.
That's right. So that was kind of that impetus of I'm going to start working with youth, which is super fun. And, for all of us that have kids that are in youth sports is psychotic right now. We're not going to chase that rabbit by any means. But, these 10-year-old kids are getting trained. Hey, let's work through a protocol before you step in the batter's box. And they're centering themselves or looking at their bat or they're adjusting their gloves. Or if they're a pitcher and they had a bad throw, these kids are getting taught some pretty cool tools. Some of them they're being taught incorrectly, but a lot of them are really, really in a positive fashion. And so that was for me all right, I need some formal education. Plus there is a gaping hole, as you guys are very well aware of, in crossing that bridge between human performance psychology and emergency response. And right. you can put any of those names in there, whether it's police, fire, EMS, special operations is doing some of this. And the SWAT teams have been doing it for quite a while, but really largely the American Fire Service specifically is completely ignoring that there's humans responding to these calls.
Right.
And they train really, really hard on basic skills, but sometimes that's not enough. We don't just figure it out when we get there. There's a lot of stuff we have to figure out, where's the fire blowing out of the window, or which window am I throwing a ladder to first, or how much hose do I need, stretching, all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But if guys and girls are getting off the rig and their heart rate, all they did was just ride to the fire and their heart rate is 150, 160 beats per minute, we have a serious problem that's about to unfold.
Yeah,
Yes.
and your brain, that the brain's not going to function correctly. Just physiologically, it's not going to happen. So I actually spoke to a nurse today, Eric. I haven't even told you this, a flight nurse, and I told him what we did and stuff, and he was saying that when they train in scenarios and such, they have to do for flight nurses, you have to do a 3-mile ruck and then go into a simulation, but they need you to walk. They never have you run first and then go into the simulation because they train you not to run to the emergency, right? Because then you're physically amped up and not making right decisions. Anyway, he said something that was, he said, yeah, and I taught myself it's worth the 3 seconds to take my deep breaths to, make the right decisions. He was like, I've never looked back at, one of my incidents and thought, I wish I had panicked more. That would have helped out. You know what I mean? No one says that. But so,
Yeah,
Kevin,
sure.
I wonder your opinion on this. You say American Fire Service is kind of last to pick it up, and I've noticed that too, and all of public safety, but especially in fire service. Why do you think subjects like human performance, I know it's starting to change, but human performance, sleep, breath work is so uncool? Why is it not, how did CrossFit become so cool? And the stuff we're talking about isn't cool yet. And Andrew Huberman was making it cool, then he had to go fuck it up for all of us. And so now it's all right, well, how do we make this cool? And I'm trying to make it cool, and I feel cool people are doing it, but why do you think it's so not cool to like really put resources behind this?
Well, I think part of it is you can't see it. It's pretty cool if I can throw a bunch of weight over my head or do 50 kipping pull-ups unbroken. That's pretty cool. And I got big biceps, like that's pretty cool. But when we start to talk about like resiliency and brain stuff, we can't see it. And so I think there's kind of a mix, and we're unique here in Colorado for sure, where, we're in kind of like this hippy dippy environment sometimes based on where you're at in Colorado. But then again, we also have huge resources like the Olympic Training Center that have been doing this stuff for 40 years, which is also based out of Colorado. And so I think a lot of it just has to do, it's really hard to measure. You can't see it. I can't see if Olivia, if you're training breath work, I can't see that you've done that, And so I think that that's part of it. And I think, some people probably use, like, when we talk about mindfulness, you have like a picture of a cartoon llama on top of a mountain, and like a loincloth or whatever. And like,
They always make them cartoony. Like everything's cartoony. Yeah. And this shirt, one of our students gave it to me, and I actually really, really love it. She's a national park ranger. And it says, for those who are listening and not seeing, it says cactus yoga on it. And the reason I love it is we just moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I love cacti. So I'm into it. But my point is whenever it comes to yoga, it's like, let's make it look silly. There's no like cactus CrossFit shirt, with like a cactus throwing weight up. So, and also before I go on, Eric, do you see from what Kevin was just saying, how when he presented, I was like, you got to be kidding me. He's saying the things that I say, because I say that exact thing, Kevin. I say, you can see when I talk about 3 reasons that first responders have not brought yoga in as a staple. And one of them is that you can see someone, it's a subtle body thing. You can see someone flip a tire. You can measure how fast it takes them to run a mile. But subtle body stuff is so hard. It's not tangible enough for buy-in, easy to teach or easy to learn. So, I mean, I totally hear you.
Yeah, and I'm actually optimistic to what you're saying, Kevin, what you're saying, Olivia, too, as far as like, as we standardize this stuff in the industries, because now we can see it, we can measure it, like the tools are there. And so we can start to standardize, and there is even examples of special forces, quite frankly, that are putting regulation into like their O courses. Like, you can't move on to the next station until you are in a regulated, coherent state. And that counts against you, because the longer it takes you to put yourself in that state, obviously the longer you stay at that station before you can move on. And so when we start to standardize it and start to put it into situations like that, I think that gives us a huge starting point, like a leg up of where we've been operating from. And then to the point of the flight medic who says, I've never wished to panic more. I was at a conference. This was for flight medics as well, whether you like it or not. EMS is always research driven, at least in my experiences. They always try to really be research driven. And the research around what we are doing and what we're teaching is, at this point, undeniable. Like the research is so deep and so robust that you can't deny that what we're teaching is real at this point. And so we were actually having a conversation about doing a study within this company, because this company does a lot of internal studies and then publishes it out to be an industry leader on their rapid innovation checklist. Basically, about the 3rd or 4th bullet point down was to put on that checklist 2 rounds of box breathing or something like that, so that on their standardized checklist and protocol for rapid innovation, breath work is literally listed, because we all know that if we could put a medic through a couple of rounds of breath work or mindful training where it just says, I'm calm, I'm in control, whatever it is, in that moment, their airway drops, their percentages are going to go up in those high stress environments. And so that's why they're making the argument, like, we should actually put these kinds of tools on our standardized checklists that medics have to follow, for example.
I just thought of something too. So the other thing I'm realizing is why even I, every person, and I'm sure Kevin, you too, with breathwork practices and stuff, or maybe not, maybe I'm just outing myself as a slacker, but there are days that I'm like, you know what? It's already 5 o'clock. I'm not going to do my meditation today, and this is why. You can get through and have a great call and save lives and be really great firefighters without doing this breathwork stuff, without sleeping well for a period of time, right? But you can do it thanks to adrenaline, right? Thanks to the emergency hormones. And so I think people have this impression like, oh, I see where it's important, but subconsciously they're like, I just had a great fucking day yesterday and I didn't do any of that breath work. So clearly I can skip it and still be fine. Now the issue is with cumulative stress, and it's that thing of where you boil a frog and it doesn't know it's like dying, basically. With cumulative stress, you don't know that you are piling on bricks on your nervous system. And then one day when the call drops, you're not getting that hyper adrenaline performance stuff because you're burned out, because accumulative stress has muted your ability to get into performance. And so I think this thing that we have to make sure people realize is it's sort of this silent, not a silent killer, but silent, like, if you don't start proactively when you feel you don't need it and can perform without it, if you don't do that, then you're going to get to the point where it's going to be super hard to go back and, and revise your system. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, there's a lot of tangents we can take here. I think one of the things that I would definitely like to kind of address is, none of us ever said, oh man, I wish I would have panicked more. But for me personally, in the way that I like to conduct, business on the fire ground or emergency scene or EMS calls, is I want to have efficiency of motion and kick ass and get after it and put forth a bunch of effort. And we train specifically to do that, right? So if it's viewed as panicking, if I'm running to a cardiac arrest on a pediatric patient, it could be panic, but it also could be somebody called 911 because we're going to a core zero, right? And so I know that if I call 911 and I have a family member that's in cardiac arrest, you better not be taking your time getting off the rig and finding where your stuff is, right? Oh. And so I've seen people that sprint, and they are completely panicked and way over their sympathetic line of the window of tolerance. But I've also seen people that then that response is that parasympathetic. They're way below that line as well. So I think like efficiency of motion and effort that you put forth in like movement doesn't necessarily correlate to panic. It can, but I guarantee that the special operations sniper is very comfortable sprinting across the battlefield and then taking that shot when their heart rate is pretty high and their respiration rate is high, but they can downregulate and function within that. So I think that's an important distinction to say, because I'm hauling ass, it doesn't mean that I'm panicked.
Oh, 100%. And that has, so two things. One is what I love about coherence and heart rate variability, and what's so cool about it is your heart rate can be up. It has nothing to do with like, your heart rate can be up, right? So from a physical thing, but you could still be in coherence, which is what you're talking about. I'm still in my optimal functioning, right? But also you can be sitting down, but nervous or panicked or whatever, not in a physical activated state, and your coherency could be trash. So you're absolutely right that it does not have to do anything. It's separate. It's, what do they call, mutually exclusive, or not mutually exclusive? I don't know which is the way the term goes, but it's not necessarily correlated to the physical activity you do. And I think with what the nurse was saying to me is he was just talking about their particular training of not running, but then separately he was saying, when we were just talking about how he takes his deep breaths, that he would rather take those 3 seconds to do his breath and he doesn't regret those 3 seconds, is what he's saying, So
yeah, and I think we're actually talking the same thing, because if we put ourselves over highly activated, and for those snipers to put themselves into that state where they sprint the quarter mile, half mile, whatever it is, damn well they're taking a couple of breaths to put themselves in that regulated state, to put that heart, to open up that window of tolerance and put their heartbeat back into the range they want it to be, to open up that window to take the shot. And so that's the thing that, which is super cool, is that we are all finding and talking from very different viewpoints. This is starting to translate. People are making these connections. And you started Firefighter Craftsmanship back in 2016, and same year actually as Yoga First Responders. So you think about how far this conversation has come in 8 years in the public safety world. 8 years ago when we started talking about this stuff, people really looked at us with crossed eyes and crossed arms. What the hell are you talking about? I'm curious. I love talking about this too. Kind of segueing into breathwork a little bit more, because I know that's a passion of yours. Before we get into sleep, is I actually am very appreciative, quite frankly, of Wim Hof and the Wim Hof methodology of teaching breathwork. It's not what we teach at YFR. It's teaching something different than what we really work on and teach. But I really, really appreciate it and support it, because I tell people all the time, you came up to me and people come up and say, well, what do you think of Wim Hof breathing? And I say, I think it's fantastic, because we're having this conversation because of that man and that breath technique, because it opened the door for you to actually think about breathing techniques. And so I'm not asking for your opinion on Wim Hof. That's not the point of the question. The point of the question or conversation really is that noticing the trend over the course of 8 years from when you started, and seeing some of those inflection points. Wim Hof got very, very popular for a while, and people still say that they use it and that kind of stuff, but it's the inflection points like that that help us drive our conversation. So you've been on the journey for 8 years. The journey is different now than when you started. So just expound on that a bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we've talked about this a bunch on our crew level, of the conversations that happen at the kitchen table in the firehouse, right? Where we solve all the problems in the entire world. Happens at that.
And then create twice as many. So.
Yeah. We create hypervigilance at the kitchen table too. Yeah. But those conversations now, and that's where, if you're somehow, I'm one of the old guys in the fire service now, and so it's well, how did that happen first off? But it's also up to me to then say, hey, here's some things I've learned along the way. And that folds into that 8-year growth of a side thing like Firefighter Craftsmanship, right? Of man, when we started this out, it was pulling teeth. We luckily had a cancellation. That's where we got an hour and a half in the academy. That's the only reason we got that time. And then there was such good feedback that they were like, damn it, I gotta give them a little bit more.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So they give you an inch, and you're like, "Watch this! I'm gonna take a mile. I'm gonna kick that door open."
Right? Yeah. And that's the grassroots nature of all of our business in emergency response. Is hey, here's a better way to do it. Let's grind and run into that concrete 1,000 times sometimes before it starts to crack. And I think that the conversation is amazing. And the same thing, right? Where it's I'm teaching resilience training. And then you instantly go into a PTSD or talk therapy thing. And I'm not a therapist. I actually don't have any interest in doing that. That's just not the gifts that I'm given. I want to try to empower people and be a mental performance skills coach along the way, where talk therapy is amazing, and using peer support teams and those sorts of things. Yes, absolutely go in and at the least just check the oil and get rid of some of that stuff, but the conversation is now morphing into things like breath work, from Wim Hof's, same thing, right? He's given really, really good credibility with lots of peer-reviewed research studies on a very specific protocol that is thousands of years old. It's awesome, and then James Nestor kind of took that to a whole new level with the book Breath, and so I know for you, if you start talking about breath work, everybody starts to talk about James Nestor's book. Amazing. Right. But he doesn't have it's not a one size fits all. He gives you a bunch of different tools and stuff. And it kind of puts that spark, and I think for me, the spark really, really started from Brian McKenzie and Emily Hightower. And I'm blanking on his first name, Wilson, with it was Power Speed Endurance, and now it's Shift Adapt. Amazing stuff. And the Art of Breath class was kind of the very first like certification class that I could find. And so their stuff is absolutely awesome, but they talk about like, well, what works for you? You know, for you, Eric, Wim Hof might be great. For me personally, I tried Wim Hof for 30 days straight and I had severe like decrease in CO2 tolerance and things like that because of things like hypervigilance, and my window of tolerance was already so tight that it actually had like a systemic neurological and autonomic nervous system negative effect on me. And that was then correlated to CO2 tolerance, breath hold times. And so it's really like, hey, start to learn, why are you doing what you're doing? You know, so amazing to hear like a company saying, hey, you got to do a couple rounds of box breath. Well, that's cool, except the breath has a hold with an empty chamber at the bottom, which if you have crappy CO2 tolerance and maybe you already have PTS or PTSD, that could create a manic state because now you're fighting for air and it flips you over that line of sympathetic tolerance. And so like, again, amazing. Let's put some breath work in there, but maybe it's like, hey, you have to do some breath work. Maybe that's a 2-to-1 call, right? Which is very heavily studied. If I double my exhalation versus my inhalation, we know that that creates parasympathetic response. And then all that's doing is just making me blow out air longer. It's making me kind of focus, be aware of how fast I'm breathing, things like that. I would rather see a protocol like that than say, hey, do a box breath, you know, because the box breath really kind of came in from Mark Devine with Seal Fit. And he really did a lot of good work there of kind of getting that as a tactical breath. And for me, especially like in an SCBA, I don't box breathe ever, you know, like I don't need holding my breath when I'm working, you know, so just to learn those things. And I think that's the cool thing over the 8 years is now for me, I'm like, oh yeah, here's a plug and play. Cause we like to have the answers. And now it's like, after 8 years, after 3 years in a master's degree program, like I feel like I know less now today than I knew back in 2016 when I started teaching this stuff. Because
I know it can feel that way the more you learn. And one thing just on your example of box breathing is we consider box breathing a more advanced breath work. For a specific purpose. So so that is the one thing. If someone does say, okay, throw in a box breath, there's no foundation underneath that to get to the, you know, so you have the 2-to-1, which is the exhaling twice as long. Our little, you know, that little anchor we give people is called recovery breath, in for 3, out for 5. And that's sort of the anchor, you know, for when you're at work and you need something to grab onto, you know, so it's very similar there. Kevin, do you feel with your knowledge and I'm assuming you put in your own training with this stuff, how are you right now? Like as a firefighter, as a dad, as a husband, as a man, as a person, how is your performance? How is your sleep? Like how literally are you doing in your life? And I mean, do you feel like the techniques and the training you're doing has made a difference that you can say, I'm doing X? Like what's going on with you and between your ears?
this is like your Barbara Walters to make me cry or something on your podcast. You know, I mean, the honest answer is I'm completely overwhelmed, right? Like I like to stack too much on my plate all the time. And even for me, like that stack has fallen over and now it's piling up even higher. But I'm trying to get through school and do a great job and research that matters, you know? And so for me, I'm stoked and I'm overwhelmed, but that's kind of how I like to do my stuff. I know my family's ready for me to be done with some of this stuff. And I think for all of us, we're kind of ready, you know, for a break overall. And we're ready to have some good family time and kind of reconnect a little bit. But as far as I think, you'd have to ask my crew, right? Am I good at the job? I think so. We get out and we get after it and we train hard and we laugh a lot, you know? Yeah. But from that, where I intentionally overload my plate. And so I've really had to tap in hard, make sure that I'm doing the right things, because I can tell very, very quickly if I haven't gotten a few good workouts in a week. I can tap in really, really quickly if I haven't done like rest and recovery, if I haven't slept very well. Like for me, when we talk about that window of tolerance, you'll hear me talk about that a lot in the content. It's that sympathetic fight or flight line is parallel to the parasympathetic rest and digest. And over time, that thing shrinks and gets really, really tight together. And it gets far apart by doing things like mindfulness routines or meditations or sleep, breath work, good solid workouts to get rid of some of that stress, And so I really, really notice, and I think my family probably notices even more, like at times my window of tolerance is really, really tight. And so I just have to be really, really mindful about, all right, organizationally, we're going through a lot of stuff. Just with a growing department, every department out there is running more and more calls year over year, and then trying to push and grind and be involved in committees and bring new information to stuff. And so I think for me, it's been very, very important, and it's really kind of solidified. Like, this isn't just witchcraft. This isn't just like woo woo stuff. I can tell a huge difference if I do things like sauna, and do a mindfulness routine in there, and hydrate and make sure that I'm going to bed at the same time, and really trying to control those controllable factors. And then if I throw breath work on top of that, and I'm a huge fan of yoga nidra, a neuro nidra, a non-sleep deep rest practice. That thing saves my life multiple times in a week, where it's like, hey, I only have a little bit of time here. And I would 100% today, if we went through a yoga class after you guys got done laughing at me from like my Elvis legs of trying to be in yoga positions for more than 0 seconds, I would be one of those guys that would fall asleep in that neuro reset 100%. And so I think it's just really important to understand that, when I'm dealing with one of my kids or my wife, like, it's not their fault that I've stacked all this stuff on top of my plate. So how can I come home? I told the story on one of the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcasts. I think it was with Emily Hightower, where, we work a 4896. So we had two shifts. We weren't super busy. We got up a couple times both nights. And then on the third day, my first day off, I went to Fire Academy and taught the resilience, the human performance for the fireground class. And then I came home and I'm jazzed, right? I love teaching that stuff. This is my jam. This is what I really, really like to do. I've got a great crew at work. We have a great time. And as soon as I walked over that threshold of the door into my house, it was like somebody unplugged my battery, and it was like flashing, like recharge, right? It was like this feeling of just like a total power down. You could feel the energy leaving the body, because now all of those stress chemicals, adrenaline, all that is finally gone, because now I'm in a safe space that I'm at home, right? And so now I'm powering down. Well, now the kids haven't seen me for almost 3 days. They're stoked to see me, right? And so now they want to play. And those are the times that it's really important that we show up, in my mind. And that's where I think that the meat really is. Really long-winded answer, but I think that's where the meat. So for me, how am I doing? I have to really, really focus hard, more so on like rest recovery, to be engaged, just based on the amount of stuff that I've currently stacked on my plate, but also knowing like, hey, we're almost done. It doesn't do a lot of good to complain about it. These are all choices that I've made to intentionally do. I choose to be a firefighter. I choose to go to school. And I choose to do a bunch of extra work, and on top of that. But it's really important that we plug some of these tools and systems in, and what works for me might not work for you. And that's okay. But find something that works for you that's probably not solely like a Jameson bottle, like do something that's good long-term. And I think the easiest thing for us to do, and the secret sauce out of all of this, is breath work for sure. That is like truly snake oil, and sleep. And both of those things are completely free to do.
Yeah. Well, as a surprise to see how Kevin's really doing, we're going to bring on his wife and his crew. Come on in, everyone.
Yeah,
perfect. Let's start
right now.
Yeah. What I really appreciated there, though, like with all of that is, and it's because of the practices you've put into place, what you've studied, is that what I heard over and over and over again is that you actually have awareness, self-awareness, to notice where that window of tolerance is expanding and contracting. Because a lot of people think like, oh, I did breath work once, I'm going to have a great window of tolerance for the rest of my life, or I've done one yoga class or whatever. And like, and you said it directly from your own lived experience, that window of tolerance, it really does expand and constrict real time. Like real time. You can put these tools into place to give it the best opportunity to stay as expanded as possible. But the reality of the nature is that even day to day, that can fluctuate. And so we as public safety, we as humans need to be aware of where that window is at today and what my capacity is in this moment, because it does change. And so by being aware of that, then you can immediately flip into, I go back and think about my week. I haven't done my workouts. I haven't done my breath work. I haven't done my sauna. It's those tools that I know I need to be putting in place. And so that's really, I think, where your pre-resilience comes into play, because you're giving those tools and free tools, quite frankly, for the most part, to people, and then giving them the awareness of that window of tolerance fluctuating open and shut over time. And so with yoga first responders, we talk about the window of tolerance as well, and using the mindfulness practices of the moving meditation to just know where you're at. Like, we know where X is at. So are we on the X? Are we falling a little bit short of the X? Are we in front of the X? Like, where are we at? But just even to be aware of where that X is at, because in our culture, it can get so normalized to just kind of not even know if I'm on the X or not. And that's kind of a scary situation, but it's the reality. And so conversations like this help folks start to realize, like, maybe I'm normalizing things that I shouldn't be normalizing.
Hey, Kevin, how informed is your wife and your crew about this subject matter? And the reason that I ask is like for Eric and me, since we literally do the same thing, we're partners in this coaching that we do. I can tell him, like, so speaking of, I also know what you mean with the window of tolerance moving, and I can feel it. And if it's getting tight with me, I take a moment and I look back on the last few days. Have I done what I know I need to do in order to, be in a state of optimal functioning and mastering of my own system? And for me personally, it's breathing and moving my body. And I like to do it in a sauna, actually, where I do my breath work, I do my meditation, I move my body, and I can see, I haven't done it. So I'll look at Eric and I'll literally say, I got to go move my body. And that's all the explanation that he needs to know what's underneath the surface. I haven't done enough. My window tolerance is I'm not in a good state. And it's because we teach this stuff and we speak the same language. So with your family, both at home and at the firehouse, how much are they tuned into that you can have that kind of communication with them?
Yeah, we've had lots of conversations, and like even in friend groups, like I like to talk about breath. I like to talk about mouth tape at night, like stuff like that, and somebody will ask a question, maybe that's new to the circle, and the rest of the friend group and my wife might be like, oh my God, here we go. Right. So I think, it's that balance. And I think you made a good point earlier of like, sometimes like organizationally, if you have some great things, it's sometimes hard to bring those to your department, where you could go to the next door agency and bring them and be a little bit better received just because you're around it all the time. And so, for us at work specifically, we really like having probies. We really like having new members join our engine company. We love to get out and basic skill train. And then as we build those basic skills, which they come out of the fire academy very, very high. So now we have to teach them the relevance and how to do it under stress, because there's nothing controlled anymore. Now we start to give them some of these real tools under stress or when you're tired. Hey, these are some of the things I see, where we need you to maybe step up on this thing, or here's a deficiency that I see pretty consistently and we got you, right? Like, I know that this is probably how you're going to operate on night 2, and we've been up 5 times both nights. This is what I'm going to do to help you out. But here's the things that I've known, or we've had these conversations as a crew. I think it's really important to be like, hey, we need to have just open, honest conversations about, hey, I'm a captain. So, hey, Cap, like you're doing this stuff and maybe it's driving me crazy. or, hey, you're doing this stuff, but I got you, right? Like, we're going to do this. And I think that my crew, we really try hard to know kind of where each other is. By the time 3-4 minutes after we walk in the door, right? And I'm very fortunate where I've worked with some of the guys. So my engineer, him and I have been together for, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years. So we know how each other operates when we're tired and hungry and those sorts of things. And so building those cohesive teams, and I think it comes down to a tribe, and building the tribe and building those things. And that's where my wife has been great for me, especially in relation to the window of tolerance. Is her and I met in EMT school a long time ago, didn't date for a long time. And then we started dating right before or as I got hired with my job. And so she knew me before I was in the fire service, and then has seen me get better in some areas and definitely not get better in other areas, and is a really good sounding board of saying, hey, I remember we had a conversation a long time ago that said there was somebody that was at our department that was really, really negative, and I was in a station with them. And I told her, I said, if I ever act like that person, you have full ability to punch me square in the face. And she was like, oh, sweet. Check. Right. And a couple years ago, she said, hey, you remember that conversation we had about this person? And you said, if you ever turned into that, I could punch you in the face. And I knew at that exact moment, I knew before that I kind of turned into that. And I was like, here we go. Right. Like, she's going to cold cock me. She said, I'm not going to punch you in the face, but you got to stop, man. You got to stop. And that was a good thing of like, even as this happened as I'm teaching this stuff. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think I probably get a lot of this stuff wrong more than I get it right. There's no there's no end game to this. It's just working towards getting better, but you have to have people in your life. And hopefully those are people that aren't necessarily in emergency services to say, hey man, like, I notice a change and it's probably not healthy. Maybe it's time to go talk to that department psychologist. Or maybe it's time to call your buddy who's on peer support and just see what they can do for you, right? Or maybe it's time to take a yoga for first responders class and build some more tools and be kind of a weirdo, because yoga is so weird, right? Even though we know it's super, super great for us, to not necessarily like suffer better, but to build more tools to have a longer, happier, healthier career, so that when you're done, you're not all burned out and you have none of those relationships in your life, and you can retire and go do something else and kick ass at that, regardless of how old you are.
Totally. Like, I would tell people all the time, like, our goal, our mission is to bankrupt the pension systems. I mean, for God's sakes, they've done the math they're guaranteeing and counting on you dying within 5 to 7 years of retirement. Like, whether you like it or not, that's the math. And so it should be all of our jobs to go bankrupt those sons of bitches so we can all go live happy, healthy, retired lives doing whatever the hell we want to for 20 and 30 years. I mean, it's not by accident that fire service, we get to retire for the most part in our early to mid 50s, if you choose to. That should give you plenty of runway to go live a kick-ass retirement and not worry about dying at 62 years old. Like, let's go. Like that. Yeah. Let's go.
I've heard it called struggle productively, which I kind of, I like the sense of that. Also, when you said, let's do yoga because, let's be the weirdos. I feel like our new slogan should be like, be weird, be a weirdo. But but honestly, like, in the fact, like, save your own life and be the fucking weirdo, that does yoga. Like, who cares? Be weird if everyone thinks it's weird, but just like go and do it. For firefighter craftsmanship, I want to make sure I'm covering everything of what this is. So you found these tools, you wanted to teach them. And like for me with YFFR, we became our own nonprofit in 2016, but I had been teaching for 3 years before that. But when I started actually being asked to do trainings and this or that, I had to create sort of a formal organization. Is that kind of what happened to you, where you're like, okay, I'm gonna take all these things I'm doing and make it a thing?
Yeah, and I think, when you have your own business, you can do what you want. And so not like, hey, I'm going to go teach this thing that's not founded in research. But You don't have to jump through as many red tape hoops, when you're working with governmental agencies and things like that. Or it gives you a forum to kind of share knowledge however you see fit. And then give people real tools to train the mental side of emergency response, right? That's the mission of Firefighter Craftsmanship. And, here's some real tools that are peer-reviewed research, not somebody that wrote a blog post, an opinion article, like peer-reviewed research that supports everything that we teach. And that's really kind of where that was founded from. And then now, after going through formal education, like the one thing that I'm really, really good at now is being a researcher, right? And so understanding what nonsense research is really, really quickly, and then what peer-reviewed research actually looks like. And that's kind of a bizarre thing for the fire service specifically, is we don't have like a fire service journal. We have a couple magazines, trade publications, but we don't. If I'm a strength and conditioning coach, every single strength and conditioning coach, at least in the United States, knows who the National Strength and Conditioning Association is, right? And the NSCA journal is a legit journal, and they have a TSAC journal, which is the tactical strength side of that stuff, and so there's some meat to some of those things. And I think in the fire service specifically, we don't have that. It's really opinion based. I can get an article published in one of those big magazines, and it can be completely nonsense, but I might have the name where it gets published, and now it becomes rote fact, and so that was kind of scary once I realized that from the research side of things of, oh man, there's not a lot of control around that. And I'm not talking like NFPA or OSHA or any of that stuff, right? I'm talking like peer-reviewed research. That's really, really beneficial. And so that's one of the nice things about teaching human performance is there's a lot of really, really good research out there that's been done. I mean, hundreds of thousands of papers in peer-reviewed journal articles and things like that. Studies. You guys have been involved in studies. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I think that's really, really important. And that's where that, firefighter craftsmanship really allowed me to kind of start to grow some roots in that, start to learn how to be a researcher, start to learn how to transmit the educational research into real life. Like, what do we actually need? And that's a thing, every week I have to teach professors. Like, I understand your view of that and your lens of that, but that is completely irrelevant, or you'll get kind of laughed out of a nation by trying to bring that thing in here. And so that's where it's kind of cool. And I take jabs at you guys because it's fun, right? Yoga's woo woo wee woo, but it's like we've done some yoga and I'm terrible, right? So I'll go first. And now, especially as an officer, like, okay, I'll talk about some of the struggles that I've had. I'll go on a podcast and talk about dealing with social anxiety, or like the story with my wife where I became a complete negative jerk who nobody wanted to be around, right? Like, I'll go first and I'll talk about that because that happens, And so let's make that a normal conversation. And that's one of those really, really cool things since 2016, especially like in the mental health space and the response to traumas and things like that. When I got hired in 2005, you never heard any of that. And so now every single firehouse, at least at our fire department, is having some sort of conversation around mental health. And that's a gigantic win, a huge W.
That's what one thing I noted about Eric when he was still on the truck was that he was the guy fully open about going to therapy. And, and really embraced the yoga. And he was great about just being an example of and transparent. And a lot of people then reached out to him about who his therapist was and stuff. And so he, Eric, I saw you do the same thing, which always impressed me.
Yeah, and it was kind of that whole like same thing, Kevin, though, that you can't be a prophet in your own land, though, right? Like, you can't. It comes back to that, because you can teach this stuff, work on it, but your own guys are just hearing it from you over and over and over again. You just gave me a new life mission, and that's to start the first peer-reviewed fire service.
I know. I was like, did we just like do? We should do it, guys. We should done.
Yeah.
That's enough on my plate. I'm gonna actually say no for once in my life. I'm gonna say
sorry. No. Kevin's overwhelmed. I forgot. He literally just told us that.
Like,
okay.
I too am saying no because I am unfortunately in the same boat where there's just 1,000 plates in the air
If
spinning.
someone's listening, if there's a listener who would like to do this, we will support you 100%.
I want to get into sleep.
Yeah.
I want to get into sleep, but we, for those listening, like Kevin and I, this is the first time that our paths have crossed, and I'm not sure that Kevin realizes how big of a breathwork nerd I am either. And so that is my passion. That is my one of my certificates I carry. I carry the Oxygen Advantage certificate from Patrick McCowan, who's right in line with the Brian McKenzie crowd and everything else. And so you hit on CO2 tolerance and how critical that is, and even knowing what those words mean, CO2 tolerance. Let's start there, especially for folks in fire service. And so I'm going to nerd out with you for a minute and bring up the Bohr effect that was founded 120 years ago at this point. And I'll be honest, man, I'm astounded that when I start to have conversations with firefighters about CO2 tolerance and the Bohr effect, 120-year-old science, that they're like, what? Like, how is this like CO2 tolerance and learning how to breathe properly and increase your ability to have higher levels of CO2 in your system is literally should be a basic skill, especially for folks that have a limited amount of air sitting on their back in a life or death situation. And so, yeah, man, like, nerd out with me on the Bohr effect and CO2 tolerance for a minute, because that's my jam as well. That's why I say, like, we're teaching something different than Wim Hof methodology and really working towards increasing CO2 tolerance for our public safety folks, because we're all chest breathing, we're all over oxygenating, broad strokes. But you walk into most day rooms across the country and our firefighters are over oxygenating, chest breathing, very small, limited CO2 tolerance. So I've seen agencies that are actually teaching this kind of stuff in academy. So are you finding, like, with your 2 days of training now, are you like starting to introduce some of these concepts like Bohr effect and that stuff into your academy through what you're teaching?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that was kind of how we got this thing in the academy. Start was a breath class. And so, with Doug McGraw, who was involved early on, he was a former professional baseball pitcher. And so he had a lot of these really cool breath work. He played through the White Sox and the Astros organizations. And so he was kind of on that forefront and like, hey, from the sports psychology side of stuff, how do we bring this in? He played against some big name dudes who hit really far homers off of him. And so, like, how did he recenter, in the minors from those things for guys that were passing through, who some of those dudes became Hall of Famers, And so him and I used to nerd out a lot about breath work, and that's really kind of where it started. So yes, I mean, if we have a breath work class and we don't talk about CO2 tolerance, which then of course includes the Bohr effect, and we don't talk about Patrick McCown's work, then we're just simply doing it wrong. We're just chasing like the next fad, and I have no interest in that. I want to know how it works and why it works and how I can make it apply to myself, because I'm selfish. But then how do I teach it to somebody else? And then they can choose where they want to be selfish and which route they take that, So that CO2 tolerance is really, really important. And, for the listeners that have no idea what we're necessarily talking about is CO2 is the primary metabolic waste of the body. And so that's what your cells create when they move around, and they create waste. And some of that we pee and poop out, and some of that we breathe out. And most of that we breathe out is from CO2. And so CO2 is also that respiratory drive. So if I hold my breath, it's not that I have a lack of oxygen. It's that my CO2 has built up to a level that the receptors in my brainstem say, hey, dude, it's time to take a breath. And if I continue to hold that and I feel like I'm drowning on dry land, right, that's just CO2 getting high enough for those receptors in the brain. Hey, oh man, you got to breathe. So that was really back when I learned that, is, okay, well, what does it matter if I have CO2 tolerance? So, well, CO2 also, because of the Bohr cycle, like a hemoglobin, as it passes by the alveoli and the bottom of the lungs, it grabs hold of oxygen molecules essentially, right? And so think of a hemoglobin like as a little car. I would draw this with my amazing artistic skills on my whiteboard. A little hemoglobin car, and it passes by the alveoli, and it's got oxygen wheels now. It's got O2 on the wheels. Well, as those cells and all the parts and muscles and things like that in the body are moving and they're creating waste, it's creating an acidotic relationship. So my pH is more acidotic than alkaline. And so as that hemoglobin car drives through, well, at some point it has to drive through essentially a tunnel of acid because of the waste of those cells. And it burns those oxygen molecules off of that hemoglobin car, and it reattaches CO2 as the wheels. And then that car drives back around. It comes back to the lungs, and I exhale it out. So there is like the simplest version of, that's how I like to teach it. And there's some other things that affect the Bohr cycle, right? Heat and things like that. But if I have higher CO2 tolerance, so meaning like if I don't have CO2 in that area of the body and it doesn't create enough acid to burn those oxygen molecules off that hemoglobin, well, then it comes all the way back around and maybe I breathe some of that oxygen back out. And I don't remember what that exact number is. On a lot of people, they're breathing really, really high levels of oxygen back out, which means that that was a very inefficient respiratory cycle. And so if I have higher levels of CO2 tolerance and I can tolerate more CO2, then I actually use more of the oxygen that I'm breathing in. And I use that as energy and fuel in the muscles and at the cellular level. And so for us as firefighters, like you said, I have a finite air supply on my back and I want to be in doing work. I don't want to have to come out and have to get another cylinder on my back. And then after a couple cylinders or whatever your department SOP is, have to go to rehab. I don't want to do that. All the fun stuff is in there, right? And so if I can have higher levels of CO2 tolerance and I become a more efficient machine, then I'm using that oxygen more and I can get more work done on the exact same 45-minute cylinder. Right. And so that's really kind of where we start to say, hey, this is why this is really relevant. And then we kind of build into like thoracic load capacity and things like that also affect the act of respiration, intercostal muscle activation and things like that, which is where yoga is absolutely amazing. And like for you guys, you talk about if you can't breathe in the position, you don't own the position. And I think about that every single time. Like I have to do overhead work, like thrusters to me is death, right? Because I have a really hard time. I get really kyphosed at the bottom of that thing, like trying to fight for position. Well, I can't breathe if I'm all kyphotic, right? I'm all hunched over. And then as I come up and I have that overhead press, it's really hard for me to breathe there too, right? Because of those intercostals are super tight. Yeah. And so that movement to me is just awful because I can't breathe at any point in that thing. And so those are kind of those movements. It's like, all right, let's get after this. But that's where mobility, thoracic load mobility specifically, and then CO2 tolerance all play really, really heavily on when I put 75 pounds of gear on, right? And I have this backpack that's heavy and I crank that thing down and I have the weight sit on my hips. And now I have this little teeny container that can really move around. At the very least, if I have better CO2 tolerance, I'm processing more of that oxygen that I'm actually breathing in.
Yeah.
I think we need to capture what Kevin just said for our instructor school, because when we talk about the
luckily enough we just recorded it. So
and CO2 tolerance, you should see us. I mean, Eric came up with a really simple explanation. Yours is great too, Kevin. I feel like we've tried to always do the whiteboard and the song and dance. I came up with like a metaphor of like an Amazon driver and the packages are O2, but like I'm just trying to do all of these different like song and dance to get that point across. But like, yeah, that's a great explanation.
Which then actually leads into the follow-up conversation about sleep. Actually, pretty well segues us into that because you brought up mouth taping. So I actually recently started to do that. I'll be honest. I didn't know how I was going to work with the beard and mustache, and I was not going to shave it off just to try taping my mouth. Like, let's be honest, that was kind of my barrier to entry. But found some tape that you can work through it. And so started to do that myself. But why that ties in then is because obviously we're shutting our mouth down increasing respiration through our nose. So we get the good nitric oxide mix through our nose, which gives a whole host of benefits when we go into the downregulated state of sleep. So sleep is your passion, like breath work and sleep. Those are Kevin's number one and number two. And so explain a little bit of how and what you teach from the sleep standpoint, if you don't mind, for fire service. Because a lot of times we start talking about giving tools through our method of neuro reset, which is a very light version of like yoga nidra, as you brought up, single point of object focus meditation, things like that, to slow that mind down. Because when we start talking about sleep, people are like, oh, you don't know my job. We get toned out and racked, and I got to get racked. I can't sleep, whatever. And so we say, well, but you can put yourself back into a rested state if you can get yourself back into the bunk room, or even find moments of that stillness. And so I'm just curious what your strategy, what your protocol is, that kind of stuff, because sleep is gaining importance. And also, huge can of worms when we talk about cancers in the fire service. But there was a wonderful wonderful official study done by the IFC on cancer reduction in the fire service, about 100 pages long or whatever. Not one mention of sleep in it, actually. And so knowing what we know, that causes some concern. So anyway, how do you approach it, man?
Yeah, massive concern. I mean, I think, and I was lucky to have James Gearing on the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcast, and we talked a lot about 24/72 and sleep and things like that for sure. And from, almost my entire master's program has had some component of chase and sleep research. And I initially started out, I got to take a cool class called Understanding Sport Research, and my professor, Dr. Garrity, let me focus specifically on sleep and the impact of sleep for firefighters, as opposed to like sport specific research. So that was really, really cool. And I was like, awesome, I'm going to dive into all these research studies about firefighters and sleep specifically. And there was like 7 of them. So I ran out of that really quick. That was the first week. Yeah.
Which is
and
why
so
we can't have a journal.
Well,
there's not enough research out there about it.
That's right. So I went into shift work. Yeah. And, the World Health Organization classifies shift work, nighttime shift work, as a known carcinogen, type 2 carcinogen. And so to see, a well-respected firefighter publication like the IFC study not even talk about sleep in relation to cancer at all, that was a disservice, because there are a lot of studies out there, shift work, specifically being a known carcinogen. Especially there's a lot of studies out there about nurses specifically. Some really, really good studies about breast cancer, things like that, and in relation to shift work. So yes, we know, and Dr. Walker has changed, Matthew Walker has changed the game on sleep. I mean, again, another one of those books that you read and you're like, holy moly, haven't anybody write this before, And so, the Why We Sleep book is tremendous. And that really kind of opened my eyes of, all right, this is really, really important, and it's probably the secret sauce. So I think, for sleep specifically, the thing that I like to talk about, we know what we do when we go to work, right? Like I said before, I choose to go to work as a firefighter, And so when I'm there, like a lot of us, we actually want to do work. I don't necessarily want to stay up every night for a bunch of nonsense, but like if something good or somebody really needs some help in the middle of the night, like I want to be on that call, And so we are there. That puts us maybe in a little bit more hard to rest, hard to recover, hard to fall asleep state when you have a little bit of that mentality. But when I'm at home, that's a completely different environment, So if I go home and I'm not controlling the controllables, I can't control when people call 911 at work. I can't. I can bitch and complain about it all I want, but it doesn't do anything, So, but I can control a lot of those things at home. I can't control when my kids get sick, or when you have a baby, you're about to get the beats and you're going to be up every night for, a year. And so, but there's a lot of things now that my kids are older, when they're not sick, is like, hey, I can control when I go to bed. I can control how much Netflix I watch or how long I stay up doing. right? Or I can control if I'm drinking evenings, if I'm having drinks every single night with dinner, just because of my routine now. Well, now I know that alcohol severely impacts that final stage of sleep, which is where our brain cleans itself. And that's what I really, really need, is my brain to clean itself so I don't get things like dementia and Alzheimer's and cancer. And so, that's really it, is like, what can we control? I can't control 911 response. Even there, what are some of the things that I can control? And a lot of departments are doing really, really good stuff, really, really simple things like blackout curtains, unlocking the thermostat so we can turn it down so we're sleeping in a cold, dark cave. So when we do have a chance to sleep, right? Like, there's been a lot of money invested at some places in regards to lighting and tones and that sort of stuff. And so I think there's so many things that we can do. And really, it's just, what I'm a big proponent of is control those controllables when you're not at work, and establish those good, healthy routines. And if you're going to do things like have some beers with dinner, that's great. Like, I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. I do that sometimes too, right? But now it's a conscious choice. Mm-hmm. And then once you go out and you get a wearable technology, Whoop Band or an Apple Watch or something, and then you start tracking your sleep, and you're like, well, why am I in the red today? Oh, it's because I had one beer last night versus the night before I had none. Like, that's pretty eye-opening there, And so I think that's a big, big deal there, is just control the controllables, and all that stuff is free for the most part, right? I mean, yes, blackout curtains will cost you some money, things like that, but a consistent bedtime, a consistent wake time, that's 100%. Just takes a little bit of discipline.
It's interesting. I'm because we're staying with my parents while we're visiting right now. And so I'm actually doing this sitting on my bed, because it's the only place I have to do it, right? When I was in high school, and speaking of going all the way back to that nervousness of being at school and stuff, I never really liked school. I had a knot in my stomach, and I went to boarding school actually for high school. And so I was 14. I was living in a dorm room. And I actually did go see the school counselor as part of like me just getting through that. But one thing I was struggling with is not being able to sleep. I could not get to sleep, was not having good sleep. And we finally realized that I was doing my homework on my bed. And so my bed was my place of thinking and not rest and recovery. And so that was so eye-opening to me. And that's when I was 14, that I've always worked really hard to make the bedroom space a rest space. The lighting, we do not have a TV in our bedroom, and we have lighting that's kind of dim, and we really make it this sacred space that it's only for sleep. That's it, and the other things, sex and sickness, right? But it's a container. It's a container for rest and recovery. So speaking of that, so I can, that is I kind of answered my own question a little bit, because I'm about to ask you a question. But for me, that was the shift, like this one shift I did that was the habit that I could maintain. So my question was going to be, okay, if you could pick one thing, because I know we shouldn't be on our phones and we shouldn't do this, and that's a lot to ask. I work all day. I want a treat, and my treat is to get to watch TikTok in bed. Okay, so don't step on my treats. Like, that's how a lot of people are feeling. Now, if there could be like one thing that'd be like, okay, try this or shift this. Like, example, for us, we make the bedroom just a sacred container, without putting, we also make the bed, and we don't have too much clutter, and stuff like that. So 2 questions. One is, if someone's listening, like, yeah, I ain't going to do any of that, if you could give them one little shift to do. And the second thing is, Eric and I really enjoy whiskey. So I'm understanding what you're saying, that when you drink with dinner, whatever, it impacts your sleep. Can you please tell me the cutoff time of when I can drink until? Asking for a friend, and that friend is me. I am my own best friend.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're a grown ass adult. You can drink however long you want, right? And
So,
I
Kevin,
like whiskey too.
try the
It's great.
biohack.
It's
Tell me when to stop drinking.
yeah. Well, I've always thought it was like, oh, I could probably like. I mean, we think about when you worked in a bar, you got trained for the alcohol stuff to not let people go out. There was one drink per hour that your liver can process, and then all right. So if I give myself like 4 or 5 hours before I go to bed, that's probably good.
Okay.
But then my Whoop band told me personally that wasn't actually true. So I think just maybe try to track some of that biometrics and just see what it looks like. Huberman and Walker are doing an awesome guest series right now on the Huberman podcast. I would highly recommend if anybody's interested in sleep to check that out. I mean, I'm listening to all those episodes multiple times and taking like notes feverishly. It's absolutely amazing. And they talk specifically about alcohol. And Dr. Walker kind of makes a joke about like, well, drink in the morning because it takes a really, really long time, 8 to 10 hours potentially to not impact sleep.
I love a good boozy.
That's
great. That's great news for me.
There you go. So good news for you. Yeah, just maybe don't drink all day, right? You can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning.
So that actually,
and I think it's just those things.
I was going to say this kind of answers my question too. What you just said, like, okay, start by tracking, some of that biofeedback. So then you can see what's good for your body. And I'm like, ooh, that is one shift I know we can do. Like I just got Eric the Oura ring for his birthday. And I'm like, that's one little shift is let me just live my life and see for myself how it's affecting me. So that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. But we also know we probably should eat like really clean food all the time and, all of that sort of stuff. And I eat crappy food as well. We have tater tots at work every now and again as well. So it's like, I mean, I think you gotta live, but I think you just,
you gotta live it.
I think, you gotta live it, And so like, don't become a slave to the biometric data either. Like that could be a whole nother like coping mechanism where you become a slave to the Whoop band or the Apple Watch or those sorts of things. I think it's just to create awareness. And if it's creating a bunch of stress in your life, you don't need more stress in your life. So then don't wear that thing. Just like, do you feel crappy? Then maybe change some stuff. Do you feel great? Then maybe you should keep doing some of that stuff. Right. And so I think the biggest thing to change, I would say that's really, really impactful, especially for emergency responders that they can control at work or at home is that consistent bedtime. Okay. And yes, you might get up at night, but creating, I think you nailed it, like a safe space that's set for sleep, and try, to disconnect there. Like for me, yeah, it's fun to watch Instagram laying in bed, but for me, I plug my phone in the bathroom. So like if I wake up in the middle of the night, like the very first habit doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm checking whatever, like. So I think that's been really, really good for me. Plus, for me, if my feet hit the ground, I just kind of make a decision at that point, like, hey, I'm already up. I'm not, no matter how comfortable that bed is. Like I set my alarm for a reason, whether it's I got to get my kids to school or I got to go to work or whatever. Like, maybe sleep longer versus hitting snooze 15 times, so there would be another thing. Like if you're up and out of bed because my phone is my alarm clock and it's plugged in the bathroom, then I'm already up. My feet have already hit the cold tile floor. It's only going to get better from there. Right. So yeah.
I think those are two great shifts, and simple, easy, achievable, attainable is the consistent bedtime and the plugging the phone in further away. I think those are simple and something someone could easily apply.
I did notice when I was on the job, like actually having a consistent bedtime and actually earlier than you think made a difference. Because you're just sitting watching TV in the recliner chair, unless you're in a super busy house or whatever. So my crew got to the point where we were actually all shutting it down between, I hate to say it, but 8:30, 9 o'clock. Like as a crew, it just kind of naturally happened that one guy started it and we were like, shit, might as well just shut it down because we don't know what the night's going to bring anyway. And that did start to make a big shift because you could hopefully get one sleep cycle in before the middle of the night calls start to roll in and whatnot too. Just helps you function for those. And then another thing, and I actually heard that was brought up on the Dr. Walker episodes, but something that I've kind of really worked towards shifting is not checking the clock. Like, I really made a shift. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what time it is. Like, if you wake up at the end of a sleep cycle in the middle of the night and you start to toss and turn, like checking the clock and seeing what time it is and seeing like, oh, I only have an hour left to sleep or 2 hours, whatever it is. It's going to give you that anxiety. So getting rid of the clocks out of the bedroom. And that includes your phone. But even like the alarm clock next to your bed, like just don't look at the clock in the middle of the night. Like, sounds silly, but seemingly highly impactful.
Yeah. Big deal, right? Don't create more stress and then where you're like, oh, I can't sleep and now it's 3 a.m. and I got a big day tomorrow and now it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I think, some of the tips that were pretty interesting was all about like the heating and cooling, especially of your hands to help with your core body temperature regulation. So that's a pretty cool thing there as well. So that's something I've been trying like at work is when we get back from a call, especially I have a hard time now. I didn't used to. I'm a professional sleeper, right? And like a lot of the crews that I've worked with always get super mad at me because it's like, okay, we do shift change at 8. So, right, everybody's up at 6:45, 7 o'clock at the latest if it was a busy night kind of a deal. It's 6:50 and we're getting up at 7. Like Housley's back in bed and he's asleep for 10 more minutes, right? And they would be like, how is that even possible? And so, but now I notice like after 19 years on the job, like if we run a call 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, I have a harder time falling back asleep, but I'm also not believing that narrative because now it's like, oh, well, now I know I'm screwed. But so that's an opportunity for me. I come back, I wash my hands in pretty hot water. I'm doing that to help decrease my core body temperature because we know like cooling down to fall asleep. Mm-hmm. So I'm just doing some of these things like, hey, does it work for me? Like splashing warm water on my face to try to help cool my core body temperature down. And then I'm doing that 2-to-1 breath work. Or if I'm like really tossing and turning, cool. Then I'm going to try to get some non-sleep deep rest here for an hour. And I'll do the longest yoga nidra Spotify thing that I have saved on my phone. And at least I'm getting some of that. And a lot of times, like I think for me, those long yoga nidra, I get it. You're not supposed to fall asleep during yoga nidra, but if you fall asleep, then you needed to sleep. And so now my brain is kind of correlated, like, that lady's voice with rest and relaxation and a lot of times sleep. So that I've kind of hacked it a little bit that way as well. So,
yeah, I think those are really good tips for at the firehouse, because that's the question, like, okay, after the call and after a run and whatnot. So yeah, that cooling the core temperature through washing your hands in hot water is actually pretty fascinating. Actually,
no, like, I'm going to try that tonight.
Yeah, super easy to do at the firehouse, right? Like, and this is the other thing too, is like people don't get it, but dropped calls, like even just like getting the tones dropped. I mean, people in the job get it, I guess, but just getting the tones dropped and even getting halfway to the rig and then you get the never mind, you're canceled. It still fucks with your sleep cycle, like, to be quite blunt. And most guys get it because of the years on the job. But
well, that could be even worse because you can't complete the stress cycle. So the moving and the doing of the work is circulating those hormones. So when the tone drops and you have the hormones come up and then you're not moving your body to do the work, you're not cycling through the stress hormones. So actually at one of Rick George's trainings at Developing High Performance, I was actually taking them through a yoga series to do specifically if a call gets dropped and how to move your body to complete the stress hormone cycle that was just shot up so that you can then implement the sleep hacks to then go to sleep. So, so that is something that people don't realize either. And Kevin, we got to get you our app so you can try our version of Yoga Nidra. So, and see if it helps you go to sleep. Hey, speaking of our app, sure. I know that Firefighter Craftsmanship has online courses. right? Because I saw those on there. So you have in-person training, online courses, a podcast. What other accessible things can people grab onto for support from you guys?
Yeah, we have the Resilience for the emergency scene online class. It's a self-paced class with about 8 hours worth of content in there, and that's less than $100. So you can get through a bunch of that. It covers breath work, it covers mindset, it covers how to build a tribe, a bunch of other really, really fun things there. Great feedback on that class. And then, yes, in-person classes, we teach, a 2-day hands-on kind of intensive class. And we also teach all the way down to like a half a day officer development class. Like how do you build effective teams? A class like that's all based in performance psychology. And then, the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcast. But if you hit up firefightercraftsmanship.com, there's a bunch of training resources on there as well. Even some basic skills training resources on there. And it's all kind of filterable and things like that. So there's lots of resources there. Once school is complete, we'll be launching some other online classes as well as some products. Trying to build, some communities there. We're going to do some one-on-one human performance coaching. So that we're going to take this thing to the next level. Super, super stoked about all that.
Well, I have an idea for adding content. I think we should swap courses. So we could put your course on YFFRU and give you one of our courses to put on your platform and have a little swapping of info.
Yeah.
I'm in 100%. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, there's so much synchronicity and alignment between what y'all are doing out in the world and yoga first responders. And so I'm actually kind of crazy and sad that it took this long before I actually got to have a real conversation with you, my man. Like, I'm fascinated by you. Go ahead.
Well, he's who I found out about the book Jaws from. And then
I had a feeling.
And then I told and now we go like that to our daughter's mouth all the time. Like we're shutting her and we're making it. She was gnawing on carrots at like 5 months old.
Well, that's the
great book. Jaws the Hidden Epidemic. It's a great book. That's where the mouth tape thing all came from, was that book right there, written by an orthodontist and a professional author. But that's pretty crazy. And a cool thing, I've been taping my mouth for probably almost 4 years. I tape it at work. I tape it at home most of the time. And the thing that I noticed really, really quickly, the first couple nights, right, you wake up with that tape on your eyeball or whatever, or like you're ripping it off in the middle of the night. But after the first couple nights, it was pretty easy for me. And I just use a little teeny thin piece of the 3M microfiber tape. You can get a whole case of it on Amazon for like $10. Take some of the sticky off. And it's this little teeny strip that I can still talk. If I have to breathe through my mouth, I can still do that. It's just a reminder to keep my lips closed, is all that is doing for me. But the thing that I noticed really, really quickly is I didn't get up to pee in the middle of the night anymore. Because I think when we tie in sleep specifically, that's the time where we should be in the most rest and relaxation of the entire day. Out of that 24-hour period, the time that you should be the most parasympathetic, rest and relaxation, is when you're asleep, right? And so, when we sleep and we do things like simply breathing through our nose, that creates a sympathetic response. Or not breathing through our nose. When we breathe through our mouth, that creates a sympathetic response. It creates a stress response, and you're more sympathetic than you are parasympathetic. So by breathing through my mouth, even though I'm in this supine resting state, it's actually creating stress that my body does not need. And hundreds of years ago, nobody breathed through their mouth. It was all breathing through their nose. And that's really where Jaws kind of came into that. And that's where the mouth tape kind of came in. But a cool little thing is when you tape your mouth and you breathe through your nose, you don't release vasopressin, which is a diuretic. Simply breathing through your mouth, the stress chemical is vasopressin. So it makes you pee more. So a lot of people, when they tape their mouth, they realize, man, I only got up once to pee versus 3 or 4 times, And so for any of this stuff, right, I think it's really important, especially for all emergency responders, go go talk to a sleep doc, talk to your primary care physician and be like, hey, do I need a referral or can I just go talk to a sleep specialist and get some sleep studies done? And like, that's the secret sauce. I mean, if you're sleeping and they say, hey, you have sleep apnea, which a lot of first responders do, right? There's ways to combat that. And one of those ways might be CPAP. And now we have this whole like, well, I don't want to wear CPAP and all that stuff because it looks stupid or whatever. And I talked to a guy this last week who said, well, I guess you feel like shit then. You like feeling like shit, you know? And so like CPAP is one of the things that might help people sleep a little bit better, but talk to these specialists. I'm not a sleep doc by any means, but figure out what works for you and think about how good you feel after a good night's sleep. And that should be your baseline. That shouldn't be a rarity.
This brings it back what you're saying throughout the whole podcast, what we preach, I don't think I've ever told you this, Kevin, or if you've heard it, but when I was in India with my teacher and I was about to leave and he's never been to the West. And I said, what would you like me to teach on your behalf for yoga? And he said, teach awareness. And that's what yoga is. It's awareness of self. And it seems like the work you're doing is heightening your own awareness. And just like you said, with seeing the feedback come in, it's like you can choose to continue to drink beers at night, but at least you have an awareness of what's happening in your own system. And so I think that just really comes back to the true essence of what yoga means, and that is awareness of self. So thank you for being on this call with us for so long. We try to limit it to 45 minutes or an hour. And then we're like, yeah, we're really doing it this time. And then we talk to great people and it's like, so we have to get shittier guests, Eric. If we're going to stick to that goal, we got to have shittier guests. So Kevin, I really am excited for you to not be in school anymore so that we can do more things together. So you are definitely on my list to contact in 5.5 weeks. And see what more we could do. But your blog's out now. We have all of your websites going to be in the notes underneath this episode. What else? Anything else before it's what? It's 9:12 p.m. I got to go to bed. I have a bedtime, Kevin. I have a set bedtime. Okay. And you're keeping me up.
I apologize. Yeah. But thank you for the opportunity. What a cool conversation too. I mean, we could sit here for 3 or 4 more hours, no doubt about it. So I really appreciate it. Stoked to have you guys both on the Firefighter Craftsmanship podcast, where I'll just hit like stop recording when we hit whatever timeline we set. But this is how long we said we were going to go. We kind of knew that this thing was going to go. So
it's going to be.
So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
When I'm trying to say something to be funny or an asshole, that's when you're going to cut me off.
Yeah, we'll tell more jokes for sure. But thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. Keep grinding out there, everybody, right? Like, you guys are doing great stuff. And I do have your app and I do listen to your stuff as well. Sometimes I use your mindfulness stuff in the sauna. So it's good, man. It's really, really good. So just keep pushing. Let me know how I can help. And please send me articles and research and that I can nerd out on. I'm a big fan of that stuff.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, I took your research and stuff, so I'll provide some back. I appreciate it, man. So.
Hey, before we go, I want to remind you that training your mental and physical health is incredibly important, especially for those working in high-stress jobs like first responders.
And if you're interested in learning more about yoga for first responders, visit yogaforfirstresponders.org for our on-demand training app, online course platform, in-person training, and more.
Like this podcast, subscribe, and give us a great review. We are so happy to have you part of the YFFR mission.